Hello everybody, Brian aka Avalonstar here, bringing you some more Stormblood coverage specifically from the San Francisco media event. This video is going to go over the some interview questions. We had about 45 minutes to interview Yoshida, and through his wonderful translator-san, Aimi, we are going to be reading to you the questions and also the answers provided by Yoshi-P and Aimi. And if you don't feel like listening, you want to read them for yourself and read them on your own time, there's going to be a link in the description to a post with the transcribed notes for this. But without further ado, we actually were able to get a lot of questions in, so I will start off from the beginning. The first question I asked was as follows: since the announcement of the end of PS3 support, there have been some welcome quality of life additions, the duty list showing queue times, etc. How much freedom is dropping the PS3 granted the development team, and what are some of the smaller, nicer quality of life additions that you've planned? To be quite honest with you, I'm not very fond of the whole sort of getting excited or being happy about PS3 support ending, Yoshi-P said. Of course, this is strictly speaking a very personal opinion of mine, but with trying to revamp Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 to A Realm Reborn, we feel we would have not been able to get to this point had it not been for the support from the PS3 players. For us, rather than being a kind of, quote, goodbye or, quote, good riddance, it is more like a, quote, thank you so much for your support over all of this time. I just wanted to get that out there and be clear about that. He continues by saying, looking back from a developer's perspective, having the PS3 as one of the platforms we support, I don't think we felt that much of a restriction when creating new content. But honestly speaking, for me, it's more on the PC platform, with the 32-bit OS and the memory capacity not being up to snuff, and I'm itching. He was very adamant about this, and I'm hoping people will switch over to the 64-bit OS soon. But with the PS3 platform, there was always an issue around load times, not the memory capacity, but load times. The access to the hard disk, its speed was a bit on the slower side, so we were noticing that it does take a bit longer to read and load all the NPCs' models and the maps, etc. So that was something that the development team couldn't really do anything on their end to improve it, so they had to constantly pay attention to the loading speed and making sure that they're reaching sort of the minimal or setting things to the lowest settings so they can accommodate it for the PS3. But with the PS3 platform support stopping and being phased out, it did allow for us to speed up on certain things. That's why you've noticed that we're making the ground mount speed faster, and we do not have to be concerned about our caps or load speeds. Instead of what content we can provide, I think there's going to be more improvement seen in usability and quality of life, as you've mentioned. You being me, I guess. I think our next sort of challenge or issue that we're going to have to take a look at would not be the PlayStation 4, but the PC and lower end machines and their specs and how far we accommodate them. And again, he reiterated that there's no point in using 32-bit. He's begging. There's no point in doing so. The second question we asked was, as you've mentioned before, as Yoshi-P has mentioned before, people are very happy with the inventory expansion. Will retainer inventory be expanded in the same way? Is that something we can expect? Preceded by a bit of laughter. In terms of inventory of the retainer, unfortunately, we do not have any in the plans at the moment. Of course, increasing the number of retainers you can hire might be something that can be considered, but expanding on the capacity of the retainer itself is not being planned for at all. With retainer inventory, it's a matter of duplication so that your retainer items won't be lost or split up, or have any sort of issues with it. Of course, it's not technically impossible to increase the... Of course, it's not technically impossible, apologies, to increase the capacity. It is something that we'll have to be very careful about managing. If we were to expand it without great consideration, it would affect the responsiveness of the retainer. It does affect the responsiveness, the sort of the data back and forth between the server and client, and we have to... There's a sort of delay, and they're not mindful about how we expand the inventory. So you might end up with a case of where you're moving inventory out of your retainer's possession, and it might take a full second for the server to respond. So we're not really able to increase the capacity at this point. And here's an interesting point that that Yoshida-san managed to add. Hopefully it will help, but it might not be a full replacement. The development team is currently considering working on an app for the smartphone where you can go in without having to log in to the game itself, and you'll be able to manage inventory of the retainers through that. As a little commentary note to that, I have heard in the past that they are looking at creating this smartphone app to allow you to communicate with your link shells and your free company without having to log into the game. So one would surmise that these are sort of one and the same app, and that you will be able to additionally manage the inventory of your retainers. Our third question was, what was the one addition in Stormblood that you've been waiting to add since you took over the development of Final Fantasy XIV? And Yoshida-san was very quick to answer, swimming and diving, laughing afterwards. For flying, as for swimming and diving, as an MMO that we've made available to play globally, it's something that I have always wanted to include. So now that we were able to include it in Stormblood, I'm really glad. He goes on to say, now I have the challenge of thinking what I should do next. Our next question was, in the past, we've talked about free company alliances. And we actually have a free company that is growing to the point where we think it might be better to have multiple free companies. As an aside, if you're not familiar with the way my free company works, my free company is based on my Twitch community. So everybody in my free company is a part of my Twitch community. But now that we're having multiple broadcasters starting to join the free company, and as their communities follow them, we are definitely kind of looking at, there's going to be that growth where you're going to have communities, the streamers leave the FC and sort of create their own FC, but we'd still love to have that concept of being under a sort of quote unquote Twitch caster alliance. Let me continue with the question. Would you think about adding features to link multiple free companies together, such as link shells comprised of multiple FCs that can be automatically created? They go on to say, first and foremost, we don't intend on having one single character belong to multiple different free companies at the same time. The reason why we don't do that is that we're worried about the breakup within the community, also managing the free company chest and the inventory that's within it. Or if you're in multiple different free companies, people might notice that you're not as active in a certain group, and people pointing that out. They just wanted to get that clear before moving on. But to sort of join a free company alliance, like say you designate a Moogle, quote unquote, Moogle alliance and have different free companies that belong to that group, that concept is already there. So the concept is already there, but right now, task-wise, we're focusing on blurring the lines between worlds, like cross worlds, the party finder, etc. So being able to connect via link shell to members within the same data center, but different worlds and stuff like that, which is something that a lot of people have been looking for as an aside. So in terms of actual task progression, I'm afraid we're not doing anything at the moment. He goes on to say, along the lines of the world list tasks that we're doing, we're also considering joining free companies that are cross-world. Trying to work to see what other world list sort of directions we can take and how to address them. So we're not able to work particularly on free company alliance matters just yet. It might be some time before we get back to it. The point to take away from that, the idea of having cross-server free companies. Our next question is, as a player of both the PS4 and PC versions, it's been really difficult to port the HUD settings from PC to PS4. Any thoughts on being able to import HUD settings on PS4 or making these settings available server side? They go on to say, we're not giving it a thought. We're definitely thinking about it, but we would have to set up one new server just for that. For example, if you're in an event and you wanted to jump on and play with your characters, having those server-side setups available so you can immediately download your character at the event venue, I'm believing character or HUD. It's very advantageous, and I recognize that. It might be something that's more long-term in terms of considering and moving forward, but it's definitely not something it's definitely not being discussed. But it could also come unexpectedly. So, and I added, please look forward to it. Didn't actually say it, probably implied it's Yoshida. We know. Our next question was, we've only been able to directly engage in combat with the Ascians in A Realm Reborn. In Heaven's Ward, they took a passive role, being more like puppet masters. Can we expect them to continue to affect things from afar, or do you see us once again taking them on directly? They go on to say, in Stormblood, they might actually be taking a step further back compared to Heaven's Ward. In Stormblood, we wanted to focus on the conflict of interpersonal relationships, man versus man, how your personal values are different, and the conflict and friction within that. So the Ascians may take another step back in terms of where their positioning is for the narrative of Stormblood. Rather than having them quote-unquote flicker in the background, so to speak, it is something that we do need to consider, whether we have the Ascians come back and you fight them full on, or if we're not taking that route, it would be interesting to have them hinted at and driving on like that. It is something that we definitely have to consider. Our next question was, it was announced yesterday that players will more easily be able to interact with NPCs while flying. Yesterday being the day before the live, there was a dev post where they showed that your chocobo or your mount could fly down to a mount or fly down to an NPC when you interact with him. Just for some context. Are there any plans around allowing players to stay mounted while talking to NPCs or accepting leave quests? Because Final Fantasy is a very scenario-driven game, we get requests even from the development team to have the character gesture and perform actions themselves. So of course we do have to consider the characters emoting or actions versus convenience. It will take some time. We don't want to jump in having, all the story-driven parts taken out for convenience. It's probably going to be a long process. In the playtest, we got to explore a lot of the Far East, and it's really hitting us how sort of expansive it is. Before the playtest, we had really had more on our mind about Alamigo. And we were wondering what the percentage of the story is devoted to Alamigo, and do we spend a considerable amount of time in the Far East? Yoshida-san replies, I think it's 50-50. Lots of thinking on his end, by the way. I think it's safe to assume that it's approximately 50-50. Maybe, actually, Alamigo may have a little bit more in terms of percentage. The reason why we didn't feature Alamigo in the hands-on that they gave us is because that so much of the architecture and the structures are already quite spoilerish, and they didn't want to spoil the story for us. Just by going into certain areas of Alamigo and seeing certain buildings and the structures that are there, it would signify a spoiler. In terms of the scope of the area around Alamigo, please be assured that it is pretty expansive as well. And the final question we got to ask them before we ended our little 45-minute session with them is there any guidance as to what parts of Evil East we'll be seeing in the raid? Is it more Final Fantasy Tactics? Is it more Final Fantasy XII? Is it a little bit of both? They replied, I think definitely if you have prior knowledge of tactics, it would be really enjoyable. With that being said, we don't want it to be so that it is mandatory that you have to have played tactics, or you won't enjoy the raid without the knowledge. So you can rest assured that we're not going to force you to have prior knowledge. Of course, there may be some elements within Return to Evil East if you are familiar with the Evil East from Final Fantasy XII. So you might recognize things. So, up until the start of Early Access, you should play Tactics ahead of time. So start playing Tactics now. And then enjoy Stormblood from Early Access on June 16th. And then in early July, when Final Fantasy XII, the Zodiac Age, comes out on July 12th, you can play that. And then right when you finish that, it'll be right on time for patch 4.1 and Return to Evil East. So you have a perfect schedule right there. And on that lovely sellout note from Yoshi-P, that was the end of our little interview. And I hope you enjoyed the questions that we were able to ask. We did try to ask questions that weren't being asked by everybody else, since there were a lot of media outlets, so we didn't want to step on each other's toes. That said, we have linked the other pieces of coverage from the media event, so please check them out, and also check out any videos that any other videos that we will have on Stormblood coverage on our way to the Stormblood launch in just a couple of weeks. Thank you so much for watching. Please, if you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And if you're on Twitch, please follow the channel, help us grow, and maybe subscribe as well. Definitely share it if you like what you saw. And please look forward to more videos from us. Again, my name is Brian, aka Avalonstar, and I will see you when I see you. Thanks for watching.